to decide how to produce the iPod. So whether to produce the iPod will depend on the price people are on Friday. Basically, they're what they sound like. Demand is how much someone wants something. Supply is how much of it there is to have. And the intuition here is unsurprising. Okay? The more that there's demand for a good, the higher will be the upward pressure on prices. The more people want a good, the higher prices will go. And the less supply there is of a good, also the higher prices will go. So if everybody wants something but it's common, the price will be low. And if no one wants something but it's uncommon, the price will still be low, and vice versa. In fact, the best sort of the development of the modern supply-demand framework was from Adam Smith, the sort of so-called first economist who wrote The Wealth of Nations, 1776, which is sort of viewed as the kind of first serious book about economics. And he posed what he called the water-diamond paradox. What Smith said in that book is, look, it's clear water is the most important thing in life. We can't live without water. And diamonds are completely irrelevant to life. You can live plenty fine without a diamond. And yet the price of diamonds is astronomical and water's free. How can this be? How can it be that water, which is so much of a fundamental building block of our life, is so much cheaper than diamonds, which are not? And the answer, of course, is that so far you've only considered demand and not supply. Yes, it's true the demand for water is much higher than demand for diamonds, but the supply is even larger. So that basically, yes, it's true that while water should be worth more, in fact, in the end, the price of water is much lower because the twin forces of demand and supply. The demand is higher, but the supply is much higher. So the price ends up lower. And that was his diamond-water paradox. Okay? Well, in this case, it's a similar thing. What's the demand? What's determining the demand for a kidney? Well, determining the demand for a kidney is going to be the fact that you die without it. Okay? If you have no kidneys, you're having kidney failure, okay, you'll die without it. So basically, what will determine is people will be willing to spend all their wealth, as much money as they can have, to get a kidney. Okay? So the demand will be quite high. The supply will be quite low. Sadly, not many people are willing to be organ donors. More relevantly, a lot of people aren't in good situations to be organ donors. Okay? As a result, the supply is much lower than the demand. So you have a situation with a high demand, a low supply, and the price went through the roof. That's the positive analysis. Okay? So we can understand pretty intuitively, we don't need this course to understand why the price went up. Okay? It's just the twin powers of demand and supply. But what about the normative question, which is, should this sale be allowed, should eBay have allowed this sale to happen? eBay at $5 million cut it off and then passed a rule saying you can't auction your body parts on eBay. Okay? Should they have done that? That's the normative question. That's where economics gets really interesting, which is, you're all smart enough to figure out why the price went up. But this is where it gets interesting, is should people have been able to auction their kidney on eBay? On the one hand, many, many people in this country die for want of a body part. Okay? Thousands to hundreds of thousands of people die every year waiting for a transplant. Okay? If someone's incredibly rich and they want a body part, which to me is surplus, because I have 2 kidneys, why shouldn't they be allowed to buy it from me? Okay, I'm better off because they can pay me a ton of money. Okay, they're better off because they live. So we've just described a transaction that makes both parties better off. Why shouldn't that be allowed to happen? So you tell me. Does anyone argue, does everyone think eBay was wrong? Yeah, go ahead.
Doing so, the other person doesn't have as much money, will also die, so there's like a third party involved that doing well.
Okay, so the person, you mean the person who, what do you mean the person who doesn't have much?
Like, enough kidneys to, like, there's going to obviously be somebody who doesn't get a kidney.
Right, so on the one, so in other words, what you're assuming is, let's say that if I hadn't done the auction on eBay, I would have just given my kidney away to the transplant center. Then that's one less kidney that go to the transplant center. And that means the rich guy gets the kidney and someone else implicitly doesn't. That's a trade-off. Okay, you've just described the trade-off. The trade-off is that basically now we've allocated the kidney away from the poor person to the rich person. Now, but why do we care about that? I mean, they both, it's one person dies, another person lives. Why do we care? Yeah.
Be some sort of case of severity of condition, like there might be someone who's poor who would get the kidney if it went to a transplant. association because they would die in like, I don't know, a couple of days without it. Whereas the rich person might just be able to afford it, and it might make their life more convenient, but they might not be in any moral peril.
They might be a collector.
Yeah.
So basically, that's a very, so one reason we might care is because we think that kidneys should be allocated on the basis of who needs it the most. Okay, so the great example of this, of course, was Mickey Mantle with a liver transplant. Mickey Mantle, famous ball player, raging alcoholic, who had liver failure because he basically was drinking himself to death and jumped the queue and got a liver above a lot of people, and then he kept drinking and killed himself and wasted the liver he'd gotten. Okay, so basically, you could think that doesn't make sense. We should get the people who need it the most from it to be the most good in terms of increasing their life. Okay, but let's actually, okay, so that's a good, so we've got the substitution point. Okay, let's come back to the substitution point though. Tell me a situation in which that's wrong. Can someone tell me a situation in which in fact that's not a valid point? Yeah.
The guy's only going to sell, so the reason I'm going to give it away.
Exactly. You were assuming that if the guy didn't sell it, he'd give it away. But in fact, if it's sell it or keep it, then there's no trade-off. And similar here, it's not like it'll go to, if it's sell it or keep it, then you might as well let the rich guy get it. Or is there another argument? Is there another reason why you might not want this to happen? Yeah?
Maybe encourage illegal,
Legal
ways of getting kidney, like.
Yeah, the other reason could be that we don't trust people to make good decisions when money's involved. That we think that, gee, if it's really true I can get a couple $1,000,000 for a kidney, I might give mine up even if I haven't really thought through the ramifications of doing so. Even if there's a risk to the surgery, there's a risk that my other kidney will then fail, then I'll be screwed. Okay? So basically, we might have a paternalistic attitude that will lead us to not want to allow people to engage in this kind of risky behavior. Yeah?
Also be some legal ramifications associated with that. If someone sells their kidney and then their other kidney fails, they might then blame eBay.
Want it back? Like that repo movie? Yeah. That's right. There could also be, but let's leave the lawyers out of this. Okay. I don't like lawyers. We're going to rag on lawyers this semester. We're going to leave the lawyers out of this. But in any case, you're right. That's sort of a ramification of the same thing. So we've talked about the fact that there's substitution. We've talked about the fact that it's not allocated to those who need it the most. We've talked about the fact that people may be making bad decisions in doing this. But there's another factor as well, which is we may just as a society feel it's unfair that rich people can get things poor people can't. There may be a pure equity component here, okay, which is simply that we as society value equality, value income inequality, and we think people should not have an extra shot at getting a resource just because they're rich. Now, that is a very deep and hard concept and we'll spend a couple lectures talking about equity towards the end of the semester. By and large, we won't consider it, okay? But it turns out to be behind much of what we'll discuss, okay, much of what we'll discuss this semester and much of what goes on in economics, okay? Just take a look at the debate that's going on right now in terms of President Obama trying to decide whether or not to extend tax cuts to wealthy individuals in the US. Okay? Some people argue that allowing those tax cuts would promote the economy. Okay? But others argue it's unfair for rich people to get tax breaks. And that fairness argument matters a lot in terms of driving the kinds of economic policy decisions, the kind of economic decisions we need to make. So this semester, we're going to focus a lot on efficiency and optimization and how to get resources from the right to the right place. But you have to remember behind a lot of this is deep normative issues about what should be happening, how should an economy function, and in particular, how should we think about these kind of equity issues that are so important. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about why micro is not just an abstract concept for things like, you might say, oh, this is all pretty funny, and it's like, you know, selling kidneys on eBay and tax cuts for the rich, and why do I care? Okay? Well, you care because literally every decision you make is made through the kind of framework we're going to think about this semester. Okay? Now, different decisions may follow our models more closely and less closely. But there is not an economic decision. Okay? There's not, sorry, so back up. There's not a decision that people have made the economists haven't tried to model. From whether to produce iPods to how many times to have sex each week. Okay? These are all things economists have tried to model with varying degrees of success. Okay? And these are because economists think that these all come from the same decision theoretic framework that we can discuss. Let's talk about a simple example from this course. Your decision of whether or not to buy the textbook. There's a textbook, and what's it cost? 140 bucks? What's it cost? Anyone know? No, Claudia?
Amazon says 180.
What?
Amazon says 180, but it's
Okay.
available for 130.
130, fine. So 130 bucks for Professor Perloff out at Berkeley. He doesn't get it all. I wrote a textbook too. He gets a small share of it. Okay, so you have to decide. Now, has anyone bought a used version of the 4th edition? Well, he's the 5th edition now. Has anyone bought a used version of the 4th edition? Does anyone know what the used price is? You can be honest. I don't care.
I know some people sell it for like 85 or so.
So 85. So you've got to decide. So let's say you can buy the previous edition, the 4th edition for 85, or the current edition for 130. Okay? You've got to make that decision. Okay? How do you make that decision? Well, you may think, gee, I just make the decision. It's not really about microeconomics, but it is. We're going to model how you think about a decision like that. Well, how do you think about a decision like that? Well, the first thing you consider is your preferences. How much are you willing to take a chance that there's new stuff in the 5th edition that you need to know? Okay? If the 5th edition was identical to the 4th edition, then you'd be an idiot to not just buy the used 4th edition. But it's not. Textbook writers are smart. They update their book. Okay? So basically, the 5th edition is updated. There's new things in it. So you have to ask yourself, what are the odds that I need some of the new information in the 5th edition relative to the 4th edition? And in thinking about that, you're going to think about your preferences. In particular, are you very risk averse? Are you afraid to take a chance? Or are you risk loving? Are you willing to take a chance? Okay? That's one side of the equation. If you're someone who says, you know, I will not take a chance in life, I just have to make sure I learn the most possible from this course, then you're going to want that new edition. If you're someone who says, you know what, screw it, I'll figure it out later, I'm going to the lectures, I don't care, okay, then you might not want it that much. So that's the first factor. It's going to be your preferences, in particular how much you're willing to take a risk that you need this 5th edition. The second factor is going to be your constraint, how much money you have. Okay, the more money you have, the more you're willing, or more relevant perhaps your parents have, the more willing you are to go ahead and buy that new edition. The less money you have, the less willing you are. Okay? So basically, it's going to depend on whether you're paying or your parents are paying, in which case, what the hell, you might as well buy the 5th edition. Okay? And then finally, you're going to take these preferences and this constraint, your preferences and your resources, and go to the market and look at what does the market tell me the difference is. So you're going to say, here's how much I kind of care about 5th versus 4th edition. Here's the resources I have. Now I'll go to the market and say, aha, there's a $55 difference, a $45 difference between these two editions. So now I will solve that constrained optimization problem. And I will decide whether I want to get that book. You might be thinking to yourself, this is stupid. I never think about it that way. But the key point is you don't have to think about it exactly that way. There's a famous example in economics of what's called the as-if principle. I don't know if kids still say this one, as if. So it's the as-if principle. Okay? And basically it's from Milton Friedman, the famous economist from Chicago, who said, look, when you're playing pool, technically you could compute the optimal angles of which to shoot the ball every single time to get the appropriate bounce and get the balls in. You could do the mathematics and compute it. But professional pool players are not in this class with you, let me say that. Okay? They're not guys who are able to do that computation. They just know how to hit the ball to get the same outcome they would get if they mathematically solved for the optimal trajectory to hit the ball. Okay? They behave as if they've solved the constrained optimization problem. And your decision when you buy this book, you may not think it through the very framework that I just laid out very heuristically and will lay out more rigorously this semester. But you're going to behave as if you do, because those facts will be in your mind. You'll be thinking about it when you make that decision. So while you may feel the models we learn in this course are rather abstract and don't really explain how you behave on an everyday basis, you're going to behave as if those models are really applying to you. And if you think about over the next few days,